In this, our 13th lecture, we continue our exploration of the life lessons that we learned from the great books. And we turn now to the third of our themes. We began with the question of the unconquerable human spirit. We looked then at the lessons we learned from the great books at each stage of our lives, from youth to old age. And now we turn to love, the most powerful, perhaps, of human emotions. Lord Acton, the great British historian of liberty, said that religion and freedom had been the cause both for the noblest actions and the most evil actions. I would add to that love. And we're going to look at a series of great books from classical Greece. We will explore the courtly love of the medieval romances. We will look at two plays of that most profound student of human nature, William Shakespeare. And then we'll end with a world that has no room for romance and love, the brave new world of Aldous Huxley's novel. But we begin, as we always should, with the classical Greeks, and with two dramas by Euripides. And the first of these is the Alcestis. In an earlier lecture, when we discussed Sophocles and his Ajax, we gave Aristotle's definition of what makes a tragedy. Aristotle, the most thoughtful student of drama, who in his work, The Poetics, defined a tragedy as following. It is an imitation of an action that is complete and noble. It is performed, not narrated, with beautiful music and elevating sound effects and noble language that arouses in the audience the emotions of fear and pity. An action, and tragedy derives from an action. However well considered that action might be, it is an action, according to Aristotle, that misses the mark. And that action must be complete. That is, we must see the beginning and the end of it, always keeping in mind the Greek view that no one is happy until the end is known. And it needs to be noble. Aristotle and the Greek audience believe that it must occur, the action must occur to a king or a princess, someone high-born and well-educated, because if they got into so much trouble with all their knowledge and experience and advantages, how much more likely were you to get into trouble? And it needed to be performed, and all the plays that we now read in book form were originally like operas, sung on the stage with beautiful lyrical poetry. And the purpose of the play, the tragedy, was to awaken in you the emotions of fear and pity, and thereby to achieve a catharsis, a purging of those emotions, as when you eat too many prunes, to cleanse you, so you could then, without fear and pity, make decisions. Because the Greek drama, the Athenian tragedy, was very different from our modern entertainment, very different from Shakespeare. You did not pay to go to see a Greek drama, an Athenian tragedy. You were paid to go see it. It was part of your civic duty as a citizen of the Athenian democracy to go to the dramatic festivals that were held every March in honor of the god Dionysus. They were civic performances. And the drama itself was meant to be a forum, a school, by which the Athenians continued to educate themselves for the awesome responsibility of being the first democracy in history, the first government in history to rest upon the belief in the greatest good for the greatest number of citizens, to believe in government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It ruled over an empire of 243 Greek cities. And all decisions were made by all the citizens coming together in full assembly to decide issues of war and peace, taxation, foreign policy, domestic issues. And by citizens, I mean all males old enough to serve in the army. Women were not part of the Athenian democracy because it was believed that citizenship was a responsibility, an obligation that rested in your ability to serve your country in the great citizen army of Athens. And It also believed that slaves were not in any way dichotomous with freedom. It believed that freedom and slavery could go hand in hand. So it was an imperial democracy and a democracy that made slavery part of its institutions. The great day of the Athenian tragedy was absolutely coterminous with the great day of the Athenian democracy. From the battle at Salamis in 480 BC, when the Athenians led the Greek fleet that drove the Persians back, right down to the defeat of Athens in 404 in the Great War with Sparta. And the three tragedians who have come down to us, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, represent this great span of Athenian creativity. For the drama was created there in Athens out of the democracy and as part of the liberal education for the democracy. And Euripides was roughly the contemporary of Sophocles. Sophocles had been born perhaps in 490. Euripides was born in 480. It was said he was born on the day of the naval battle of Salamis. But Sophocles looked in some ways back to an earlier day when religion was part of the fabric of Athenian life. And he sought to state again and again the fundamental religious values that he, Sophocles, believed were shaken by the Athenian democracy and its bold experiment in thought as well as freedom. But Euripides was a man of his own day, but looking even more forward. For that reason, he was somewhat unpopular with his Athenian audience, winning far fewer prizes than Sophocles. And Aristotle did not like Euripides. He thought that some of his characters were not high-born enough, and that much of Euripides' drama was too melodramatic. But the later audiences, 100 years later, admired Euripides enormously. And in the play The Alcestis, Euripides explored the question of love. And what do we mean by true love? The play is set in a little town in Thessaly, a little kingdom in Thessaly, and Admetus is the king of this little place, Pheria, the northern part of Greece. And he had a very interesting guest some years before. The god Apollo had come to be a slave to work for Admetus. Now, we tend to think of the Greek divinities as being silly little creatures with their affairs and their jealousies. But to the Greeks, they were profound powers, powers capable of rendering the most supreme benefits to the community or punishing the community. And the very human quality of a divinity enabled the Greek to approach it with awe and reverence, but to approach it and perhaps to win its favor. So the story was told, we call them myths, but to the Greeks they were a way of stating a more profound truth. The story was told that Apollo had given birth, had sired Asclepius, and had endowed his son by a mortal woman with all the powers of a great physician, and taught the boy not only how to heal, but even to bring people back from the dead. And Apollo's son rejoiced in this power, grew proud in this power. Remember, one of the lessons of the Greek tragedy is nothing in excess. Even good things pushed too far to the point of pride lead to destruction. And so Asclepius boasted that he was stronger even than the gods. He could overcome fate and bring back the dead. So Zeus struck him dead. And Apollo was furious and outraged at the death of his son. So Apollo went off to Mount Etna in Sicily, and there struck down with his bow the sons, the Cyclops of Zeus, as they worked at the forge. And Zeus said, I can't kill you, Apollo. You're an immortal. But I sentence you to go and work for 1 year as the slave of a mortal, of Admetus, king of Pheria. And so Apollo went. But Admetus was a man of judgment and prudence. He might have abused his power over this god who had become his slave, made all sorts of outrageous demands, but instead he treated Apollo with great kindness, made the labor very, very light, and Apollo became his friend, became a friend of the whole family, of the children, and of the noble wife of Admetus, the beautiful Alcestis. And as he was going back to heaven, Apollo said, you have treated me so well that I will give you this favor. You will not have to die at the appointed time. When death comes for you, you can have a reprieve. But every time the gods give you a gift, there's always something attached to it. But by the way, if you will read the fine print, Apollo says, in order to gain this favor, someone must die for you in your place. Well, Admetus lived alone, not worrying too much about this. Day by day went by, the years went by, he had a lovely family, and then one day, death came calling. I will collect you before the next moon comes, said death. And suddenly Admetus had to find somebody to fulfill the contract. He had to find someone to die for him. A most obvious candidate would be his aged parents, wouldn't you think? They were very, very old and lived their life, so he went and said, Dad, will you please die for me? And Dad said, No, I won't die for you. He said, But you're old, you're about to die anyway. Well, I will die when I will die, but I'm not going to die for you. That's not part of being a parent. What? You've got to die for me? No. You die for yourself. Leave me alone. So he went to his mother. Now, mothers are always gentle where your father is stern. And he said, Mom, you've got to die for me. And she said, No, I am not dying for you. Your father won't die for you. I won't die for you. Dying is something you have to do on your own. And life is still sweet to us, old as we are. So he went around to all of his best friends and he said, Will you die for me? You once told me you would lay down your life for me. Yeah, but you see, I can't right now. I've got some pressing things I have to take care of. I've got to put my family first, so no one would die for him. His wife said, Dear, why are you so upset? And he said, Well, I'm going to die. And all I have to do is to find one person who will die for me. And his wife, Alcestis, said, I will die for you. You will die for me, my darling, but we still have our children to take care of. I will die for you, and you can take care of the children. If no one else will die for you, I am happy to pay that ransom for you. You will ransom your life, and those are the words used in the Greek, to save me. Yes, I will ransom my life to save you. And so death came for her, and she lay there on her deathbed. And when the play opens, Apollo tells us the story of how it came to be to this situation, how he'd labored for Admetus, how he'd given Admetus this magnificent gift, and that in the end it had turned out to be sorrow for Admetus. And Alcestis lies there on her deathbed because no one else will die for him. And then there's a touching scene between husband and wife as she tells him she must go far away, never to come back. He says how sorry he is that she must die. The children weep and moan that their mother must pass away. But the heart-wrenching scene continues, and finally she passes away. And the whole of the house of Admetus goes into mourning. The whole of the kingdom goes into mourning. Heads are shaved. The manes of horses are shaved. A great funeral feast is prepared. And while the whole is in mourning and Alcestis still lies on her deathbed, Hercules comes to town. Hercules, that most famous of all Greek heroes. And hero has a technical meaning for the Greeks. It is a man born of a mortal woman, a human, but the son of a god, who has suffered, carried out great deeds to benefit the human race, and by the greatness of his achievement, by his arete, his virtue, has raised himself to heaven. And Hercules was a supreme example of this. He was the son of Zeus by a mortal woman. Zeus loved his child, but Hera, the wife of Zeus, was deeply jealous. And she set out to kill the child, but failed in that. So she decided to let him grow to young manhood, to let him marry the beautiful woman Megara, and then to curse him with madness. And Hera struck Hercules blind with anger. Hercules in the Roman form, Heracles in the Greek form. It means well known to Hera. And he was well known to her, and she hated him. So she struck him with this madness, and he killed his wife and little children. And to expiate that sin, he had to serve a great series of labors, becoming a slave to a king and carrying out a series of labors. First of all, killing a mighty lion that roamed the neighborhood ravaging. Then Hercules had to kill the Hydra with its hundreds of heads. Each one when it was cut off, another came in its place. Bring back a stag with horns of bronze. And finally, go all the way out to the far ends of the world and bring back the golden apples of the Hesperides, thus gaining immortality. So Hercules had suffered mightily. He'd performed mighty labors. And it was on his way to one of these labors, the eighth of his labors, that Hercules had showed up there in Pherea to see his old friend Admetus. He was on his way to capture the wild horses of Diomedes, these savage beasts that were man-eating horses, and he had come to capture them. But on his way, he would stop in and spend a few nights with Admetus. That was the way the Greek heroes were, giving enormous amounts of hospitality to one another. So he appears, and notice that everything is hung with mourning. And he asked one of the servants, "What has gone on here? What is this death?" And suddenly Admetus appears and says, "My old friend, Hercules, you're here? What are you off to?" "I am off to perform another deed, to capture the wild horses of Diomedes and slay them if I must. That's a dangerous task, I know, but I thought I would get a little bit of energy by staying here and feasting with you, drinking a little bit with you, Admetus, but I notice you're in mourning. I will go away. Who is it who has died? I hope it is not your old father." "No, no, my father's alive and well, Hercules." "Well, what about your mother?" "Oh, she's alive too, old and alive." "Not one of your little children?" "No, no, my children live." "Who is it? Is it a stranger?" "Yes, she was a woman who was a stranger, but then became very dear to me. And now she lies dead." "But don't let that worry you, Hercules. You can still feast here." "No, I'm going somewhere else." "No, stay. Stay, my old friend. I would not have you sleep under another roof. Stay here, please." And then aside to the servants, he tells them, "Take Hercules to a far-off corner of the palace. Let him drink and feast to his full. Give him anything that he wants. And in the meantime, we will see to the burial of my wife." So Hercules, knowing none about this, goes off and begins to feast, and Admetus goes back to his wife where she lies there dead on the bed and weeps piteously over her. And his father comes in. And he says, "How dare you, father, come to her bedside? You're the reason she's dead. You refused to die for me." And the father said, "No, you're the reason she's dead. It wasn't my business to die for you. I never want to speak to you again." "Why? Is your guilt so great that you take it out on me? You're an old man. You should have died. I told you once before. Death comes only when it comes. And light and life are still sweet to me and still sweet to your mother. It is you who are the coward. You're the one who left your children without a mother. You're the one who found all the excuses, and you don't want to accept that responsibility." Then Hercules is feasting away, and the servants say, "This is the rudest person we have ever seen. He knows we're in mourning. He keeps demanding more and more food. He keeps getting more and more drunk. He keeps demanding that we drink with him. He gets wild and urinates all over the place. He's absolutely out of control, but we have to take care of him because our master told us to." Then Hercules begins to grasp that something is seriously wrong here. And he comes back out to Admetus and he says, "What is really wrong here? Who is it that has truly died? Is it your wife?" "Yes, it is my wife." "Why didn't you tell me that when I came?" "Because I could not turn you away. You owed me the guest friendship of the truth. Have you buried her yet?" "No." "Have you cremated her?" "No." "She still lies on her deathbed." "Then I know who is waiting for her at the tomb. It is Death himself, and I will go. I will go and fight death for your wife." And so Hercules now sees if he can overcome death itself. And Admetus waits, anxious, wondering what will become of his wife, thinking that she's lost to him forever. And then Hercules appears, coming back on the stage and carrying a woman wrapped in a shroud in his arms. But at first, he doesn't tell Admetus it's the wife. He says, well, I didn't have the luck I wanted, but I have brought you a girl, a live girl, and I'd like you to take care of her for me. I had to save her, and I'm bringing her, and I can't take her with me on my labors, so I'm going to leave this girl with you. And then Admetus says, I can't take a girl. I thought you were going to bring me my wife. Well, that didn't work out, but here, I brought you this girl. At least let her stay with you, protect her. Well, it wouldn't be seemly to have her stay in my home. Does she have a guardian or a husband or anyone to take care of her? No, it'd just be you. Well, that would be unseemly. Well, why? Well, I mean, she might be molested by the other men around. Well, you could keep her in your own bedroom. That would be unseemly. Well, why would it be all that unseemly? You have lost your wife? What's wrong with taking in this girl? Let her be your concubine. Well, I don't know if I could do that. You really think I ought to do that? Sure, you can do that. But my wife died for me. I know, and she loved you a whole lot, but she wouldn't want you to spend your whole life miserable, would she? No, probably not. I see. Aha, you see what it really is? Is that? Yes, that is Alcestis. You did bring her back. Of course I brought her back. Oh, it wasn't easy. I had to grapple with death himself, and what a fight that was. But I took him in my arms, and I crushed him, and crushed him, and crushed him, until he finally yielded and gave back Alcestis. Oh, darling, speak to me. Now, that's one of the problems. She won't be able to speak for 3 days. Isn't that interesting? How long was Jesus in hell? She won't be able to speak for 3 days. But then all of her faculties will return, and you will find her as beautiful and unchanged as the day that death came for her. And so she is brought back. And Euripides ends with a chorus, for every play has a chorus. It has a group, in this case, of the elders of the city of Pherea. And they give you common sense. Amidst all the dramatic action, they time and time bring you back with their beautiful lyrical poetry to the real lessons that the ordinary person would derive from such a dramatic performance. And the chorus says, the ways of the gods are incomprehensible to humans. What we pray for, they do not give us, and they send us what we do not ask for. Take this as a simple miracle and believe. So far from being a religious skeptic, Euripides had a deep religious belief. And the deep religious belief in this play about one who gives her life so that her husband might live forever, or at least for a longer time, is at the very root of the dramatic performances themselves. This lesson of the vicarious sacrifice, who suffers or even dies so that we can learn and avoid the mistakes that bring about destruction. For these plays were a religious performance, an altar set in the very middle of the orchestra of the theater. And each of these plays was devoted to the god Dionysus. Dionysus, the god of wine, we say, but he is also the god of fertility. And in fact, his worship was at the very center of the city worship of Athens, the civic religion of Athens. And the myth told of Dionysus, the very name means the son of God. Dio, just an ancient word for God. The son of God, or the son of Zeus. And Dionysus was the son of Zeus by a mortal woman, just like Hercules. And he had been born, and once again, Hera had been jealous of him, and she tried to destroy him. And in fact, she had him torn into pieces. But Zeus resurrected his dead son and saved him. And it was believed that Dionysus had immortal life, and that whosoever believed in Dionysus and in this myth, this deeper truth not a false story, but a deeper truth, would never die, but would live forever. And the height of the Athenian religious season every year was to go out to the shrine of Eleusis, to worship the mystery of Dionysus, to partake of a sacred meal that was believed to represent the actual blood and body of the god Dionysus, to wash yourself and to free yourself in a baptism from the sins of the past year, and to enter into immortality. So this god Dionysus was the divinity worshipped in the Athenian tragedies. Now, Dionysus is indeed the god of wine, and if you have ever seen a vineyard in the winter, it looks all cut back as though it's absolutely dead, does it not? And nothing could ever come out of it. But every year in the spring, it begins to blossom again. How do you explain this? Out of death, every year comes life. Now, to us, going to the supermarkets and just buying some grapes, it means nothing. But to the Greek, it was a most profound mystery that the gods brought life out of death every year. And it was the affirmation of life, and that life could be eternal. So the vines come back. And how do you get to enjoy the wine? The little grape, once it has ripened, has to be crushed underfoot, doesn't it? And the Greek believed that was like a ritual sacrifice in which the blood of the grape was shed so that you could have the life-giving force of wine. In fact, nothing in excess. That stood over the temple of the god Apollo at Delphi. And it means even the best of things carried too far become destructive. Nothing in excess. A glass of wine, they tell me, is good for you. Take a little wine for thy stomach's sake, St. Paul says. But too much makes you wild and crazy, doesn't it? And yes, that is the very lesson again that the Greeks learned, and why Dionysus was the god of nothing in excess and the destructive power of too much. And so the god Dionysus represents the hero who suffered and was brought back to life in order to save all of us. And that is the message of the Alcestis, that this dear woman was willing to ransom her life so that her husband could live a longer period, putting aside her children. And she literally goes to the edge of the underworld and is brought back by the saving grace of the hero Hercules. So this profound mystery of the Greek tragedy and the vicarious sacrifice would find a very profound echo in the very essence of the mystery of Christianity. And in the 2nd century and 3rd century A.D., when learned Christians, knowing the literature of Greece, read plays by Euripides, still the favorite playwright of his day in the 2nd and 3rd century A.D., they saw in this story of the Alcestis the idea that God himself sought to prepare the minds of the Gentiles, of the pagans, for the coming of the true message of Christianity. And the story of the Gospel of John that we have discussed, that Christ is the wine of life, that he is the vine of life, that we must partake of his blood and flesh as we partake of the wine and bread, just as the ancient Athenians did of Dionysus, and that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not die, but have everlasting life. The very profound mystery that was already given to us in the Alcestis of Euripides, the woman who so loved her husband that she laid down her life so that he might live, ransoming herself to save another.